You did this. You have been trying to undermine my marriage since day one. I wanted my grandchildren to be safe. That is all I ever wanted.
Well?
Family meeting?
The Wicker Park condo. Tell me about it.
She looked at me like I was nothing, like I was furniture she was dropping her kids off at. You don't do anything anymore, Sarah said. Watching 3 kids shouldn't be hard for someone with all the time in the world. I smiled. I said, okay, and then I hung up. What happened next, over the next 14 days, changed everything. For my son, for my grandchildren, and for a woman who thought she had already won. My name is Dorothy Hargrove. Most people call me Dot. I'm 65 years old, recently retired after 32 years as a charge nurse in the ICU at Mercy General Hospital in Chicago. I raised my son alone after my husband, James, died of a stroke when Daniel was 9 years old. I have 3 grandchildren I barely know because their mother decided, somewhere along the way, that I wasn't worth knowing. And I am here to tell you exactly what happened when she handed those kids to me and walked away. If you're listening from somewhere far away, drop your city in the comments. And please, stay with me until the end. The first Monday morning of my retirement, I sat in my backyard in Oak Park with a cup of coffee that was still hot. I want you to understand what that means. For 32 years, my coffee was never hot. I drank it cold between patients, or I didn't drink it at all. I worked nights, doubles, holidays. I held the hands of people who were dying, and I called their families at 2 in the morning with news no one wants to hear. I made decisions in seconds that I carried home for years, and now I was sitting in my garden with hot coffee and a stack of travel brochures on the table in front of me. Sedona, Savannah, Portland. Places I had always told myself I would visit someday when things settled down, when Daniel was older, when I had time. I finally had time. James had been gone for 26 years by then. He left for work on a Tuesday morning in October, just like any other morning, and he never came home. The stroke hit him at his work site before lunch. He was 41 years old. We had been married 12 years. Daniel was in 3rd grade and still believed his father was the strongest man alive. After James died, I had $800 in our checking account, a mortgage, a 9-year-old boy, and a nursing degree. That was it. That was everything I had to work with. I won't spend too much time on those years because if I do, I'll be here all night. What I'll say is this: I worked. I worked the way that women who have no other choice work, which is completely and without complaint and without anyone noticing. Night shifts at Mercy General, weekend shifts, holiday shifts. I picked up overtime whenever it was offered because overtime meant Daniel could go on the school field trip. Overtime meant new shoes before the old ones wore through. Overtime meant I could pretend, at least for a little while, that we were going to be okay. Daniel was a good kid, quiet and serious in the way that kids who grow up too fast tend to be. He did his homework without being asked. He learned to make his own breakfast at 10 because I was sleeping after a night shift and he didn't want to wake me. I found out about that years later and it nearly broke my heart. But we made it. That's what matters. Daniel got into college on a partial scholarship, studied structural engineering at the University of Illinois, graduated with honors. I cried so hard at his graduation that the woman sitting next to me handed me a pack of tissues and patted my arm without saying a word. Sometimes strangers understand exactly what you need. He met Sarah his 2nd year working at an engineering firm. He brought her to Sunday dinner, and she was charming and warm, and told me she admired me so much, raising a son all by herself like that. She called me a role model. She hugged me like she meant it. I believed her. I want you to know that. I believed her completely because I wanted to, and because I was so happy to see my son happy that I wasn't looking for reasons not to be. The wedding was 2 years later. I wore a dress I'd had altered 3 times because I kept losing weight from the stress of planning and pretending everything was fine when it wasn't quite. Sarah wore a dress that cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. I didn't say anything about that. I helped pay for the flowers. The changes came gradually, the way things that are slow enough tend to be invisible until suddenly they aren't. Little comments here and there. the kind that could be misread as jokes if you weren't paying attention. Daniel worked so hard, it's too bad his ambition didn't quite match his education level. No offense, Dot, but this neighborhood isn't really safe for the kids anymore. Your cooking is so heavy, the children have sensitive stomachs. Every comment was small, but they added up. And slowly, without me quite noticing how it happened, I went from being someone Sarah spoke to at Sunday dinners to someone she spoke about in the past tense. My grandchildren started coming over less, then barely at all. The last time I saw all three of them before this whole thing started was Christmas, 8 months before, and Sarah had kept them for exactly 2 hours before announcing they needed to get to her parents' house. Her parents' house, the ones with money, she meant, the ones worth their time. I had stopped fighting it. I told myself it was fine. I told myself that as long as Daniel was happy, as long as the kids were healthy, it didn't matter that I was being quietly erased from their lives. I told myself that silence was peace. I was wrong about that, but I didn't know it yet, so there I was. First Monday of retirement, hot coffee, brochure for Sedona on the table. And for about 45 minutes, I actually let myself believe that this was what the next chat was going to look like. Then my phone rang, Sarah's name on the screen. I stared at it for a moment before I answered. Whenever Sarah called, it was to ask for something. That wasn't cynicism. That was just the pattern we had settled into over years of careful distance. I picked up. She didn't say hello. Sarah never said hello. Dot, I need you to watch the kids for 2 weeks. I have a conference in Tampa. Big deal, can't miss it. Daniel's on a job site in Kansas City until the end of the month. I asked about school. She said she'd already spoken to the school. I asked about medication. She said she'd leave a list. I asked who would handle drop-off and pickup if I needed help. She said that was the whole point, wasn't it? That I would handle it. Then she said the thing. You don't do anything anymore. Watching 3 kids shouldn't be hard for someone with all the time in the world. I looked down at my hands. The same hands that had placed ivy lines in veins so small you had to feel for them in the dark. The same hands that had performed chest compressions until my arms gave out, until someone pulled me back, until there was nothing left to do. The same hands that had held a dying man's face and looked him in the eyes and told him the truth because he deserved the truth. You don't do anything anymore. 32 years of nursing had taught me to keep my voice even. And what time are you dropping them off? Tomorrow. 7 a.m. Don't give them junk food like last time. Last time. Like she hadn't been the one to send Oliver with a backpack full of candy that he'd eaten in one sitting and then blamed my cooking when his stomach hurt. I had figured that out in about 3 minutes because I am a nurse and diagnosing a stomach ache in a 7-year-old is not complicated. But I hadn't said anything because I never said anything. Oh, and Dot, she added, almost as an afterthought, don't try to fill their heads with your opinions about things. They're my kids, and I decide how they're raised. She hung up before I could respond. I sat there for a while with the phone in my hand and the brochure for Sedona going a little blurry at the edges. Then I picked up my coffee, took a long sip, still hot barely, and made a decision, not about the kids, not yet. Something else first, I called Beverly. Beverly Oaks has been my best friend for 20 years. We met in the break room at Mercy General in 2004, both of us eating bad vending machine sandwiches at 3 in the morning, and we've been talking ever since. Before she retired, Beverly spent 18 years as an auditor at the Cook County Assessor's Office. She knows how to read numbers the way I know how to read a patient chart. She knows what things look like when they're wrong. Bev, I said when she picked up, do you still have access to county property records? Public records, yeah. Why? I need you to run a name for me, Sarah Pruitt. That's her maiden name before she married my son. A pause. Dot, what are you thinking? I don't know yet, I said. But in 32 years, I learned one thing. When something doesn't feel right, you check. You don't wait until the patient crashes to run the labs. Beverly was quiet for a moment. Then she said, give me a day or two. They arrived at 7:05 the next morning. Sarah's black SUV pulled up to the curb and the 3 of them climbed out. Liam, 13, with headphones around his neck and his eyes already somewhere else. Nora, 10, arms crossed, looking around my front yard like she was being asked to move into a place she hadn't approved. And Oliver, 7, who immediately pushed past me into the house looking for the television. Sarah didn't get out of the car. She rolled down the window and handed me a tote bag. Medication in the blue pouch, instructions on top. Liam has a dentist appointment on the 14th. I'll reschedule it. Don't let them eat after 8. Oliver can't have dairy after noon or he doesn't sleep. She put her sunglasses on. I'll be back in 2 weeks. Sarah, I said. She looked at me, waiting. I almost said something real, something I'd been holding for years. But I looked at the 3 kids standing on my porch with their enormous suitcases. And I thought, not now, not in front of them. Have a safe trip, I said. She drove away without waving. I turned to face my grandchildren. Liam was already on his phone. Nora was looking at the house with an expression I recognized from the hospital, the face people make when they're deciding how bad it is. Oliver had made it as far as the living room doorway and was looking around for something to evaluate. I had spent 32 years reading people in the first 60 seconds. What I saw in those 3 kids was not attitude. It wasn't rudeness, not really. What I saw was the particular kind of guardedness that children develop when they've been taught to expect disappointment. Liam's left shoulder sat higher than his right, chronic tension, the kind you get from carrying something too heavy for too long. Nora was biting the inside of her cheek. Oliver was loud and bouncy and constantly in motion, the way kids are when they've learned that being still makes them invisible, and invisible isn't safe. They weren't bad kids. They were kids who had been through something. I kept my voice easy the way I used to talk to family members in the ICU waiting room. Not falsely cheerful, just steady. All right, I said. Let me show you where everything is. 3 rules while you're here. We eat together, everyone helps with 1 small thing per day, and phones go face down at the dinner table. That's it. That's the whole list. Liam looked up from his phone. What's the Wi-Fi password? I gave it to him. The router upstairs had parental controls I'd set up the night before, not to cut the internet off, just to limit the hours after 10 at night. Liam blinked at me like he hadn't expected me to know what parental controls were. You're going to lock it down, he said flatly. From 10 at night to 7 in the morning, I said. You need your sleep, so do I. He looked at me a moment longer. Then he put his headphones back on and went to find his room. Nora stood in the entryway and said, Mom says your house is old. It is, I agreed. 43 years old. I've fixed the plumbing 4 times. She didn't seem to know what to do with that. Are you going to make us do chores? Oliver called from the living room, where he had already located the TV remote and was now holding it like a trophy. You can start it up, I told him. After lunch. He dropped onto the couch with the kind of theatrical suffering that only 7-year-olds can pull off, and I went to the kitchen to make breakfast, and that was the first hour. That first night, around 11, I heard crying from Nora's room. Not the loud kind, the quiet kind, the kind that's been practiced, that's learned to take up as little space as possible. I stood outside her door for a few minutes, the way I used to stand outside patient rooms when I wasn't sure yet what was needed. Sometimes people need someone to come in. Sometimes they need to know someone is close but not crowding them. After 3 minutes, I knocked softly. She went quiet immediately. I opened the door just enough to see her. She was sitting up in bed with something pressed against her chest, a small shirt, pale blue, worn soft from washing. I recognized it. It was a shirt of Daniel's from when he was about her age, the one I had given her 2 Christmases ago when Sarah wasn't in the room. I hadn't known she still had it. She shoved it under her pillow when she saw me. I didn't say anything about that. I just came in and sat down on the floor beside her bed, my back against the nightstand. She looked at me like she was waiting for the lecture. You don't have to talk, I said. I just didn't want you to be alone. She didn't talk, but she didn't ask me to leave either. After a while, she said very quietly, Mom says you don't like us. Your mom is wrong about that, I said. Simple as that. No defense, no argument, just the correction, stated plainly. Nora was quiet again. Then, she says you never liked her either. Your mom and I have a complicated relationship, I said. That's between her and me. It has nothing to do with how I feel about you. I stayed until her breathing slowed down, and she was somewhere between awake and asleep. Then I got up, turned off the light, and went back to my room. Day 3, something shifted. It wasn't dramatic. These things never are, not at first. Liam left his headphones on the table during dinner instead of wearing them. That was all. He didn't talk much, but he sat there present. And when Oliver knocked over his glass of water, Liam grabbed a kitchen towel and mopped it up before I could even stand. Oliver watched me during dinner with those big, dark eyes of his. Every so often, he would do something, pass the salt, eat a vegetable without being told, and then look up to see if I had noticed. I noticed every time. I didn't make a big deal of it. I just met his eyes and gave him a small nod, the kind that says, I see you. That was enough. He'd look back down at his plate with the corners of his mouth, doing something they were trying not to do. Day 4. I made cornbread from my mother's recipe and let Nora help me. My mother's cornbread takes 40 minutes and involves more steps than most people think cornbread should involve, and that was exactly the point. Why does it have to be so complicated? Nora asked, looking at the list of ingredients like it had personally offended her. Because the good stuff takes time, I said. There's no shortcut for things that are actually worth having. She considered this while she measured out the buttermilk. Mom buys cornbread from Trader Joe's, she said. That's fine too, I said. But this is the one my grandmother made. And her grandmother before that. When you eat this cornbread, you're eating something that's older than anyone in this room. Nora looked at the bowl. Something moved across her face, something young and soft that she usually kept tucked away. Are you scared? She asked me out of nowhere. Of what? Just in general. Are you scared of stuff? I thought about that for a second. All the time, I said. But I learned a long time ago that being scared doesn't mean you stop. It just means you do the thing while you're scared. She nodded like she was filing that away somewhere. I get scared a lot, she said. Then, quickly, like she hadn't meant to say it, don't tell anyone I said that. Nora, I said, everything you tell me stays right here. She stirred the batter without looking up, but her shoulders dropped about half an inch, and in my world, that counts for a lot. Day 5, Beverly called. I stepped out to the back porch and pulled the door shut behind me. In the kitchen, I could hear Liam helping Oliver with something. There were sounds of low-level negotiation happening, the older sibling kind. Dot, Beverly said, and something in her voice before she said another word. I ran the name. Sarah Pruitt cross-referenced with Hargrove after the marriage date. What did you find? 4 property transactions in the last 18 months. All of them list Daniel Hargrove as co-borrower. None of the property addresses are your son's house, Dot. These are other properties, investment properties, and Daniel's name is on all of them. I stood very still on the porch. Is that possible without him knowing? I asked, though I already knew the answer. I had worked with enough people in crisis to know how these things happen. People trust the people they love. They sign things they shouldn't, because the person handing them the pen has been in their bed every night for years, and their brain cannot fully process that this person might be working against them. It happens, Beverly said carefully. And Dot, there's more. One of these, a condo in Wicker Park, was purchased under Daniel's name as co-owner and sold 7 months later. The profit, around $47,000 after fees, went into an LLC. The LLC is registered to a Garrett Wills and someone listed as S. Pruitt. S. Pruitt, not S. Hargrove, her maiden name. Send me everything, I said. And Bev, keep digging if you can. I want to know if there's anything else we haven't found yet. Dot. You know this could be federal territory. I know, I said. Send it anyway. I stood on the porch for another minute after we hung up. Through the window, I could see Liam and Oliver in the kitchen. Oliver had gotten into the cabinet where I keep the pasta and was arranging different box shapes into some kind of system that made sense only to him. Liam was leaning against the counter watching, with the tired patience of someone who has been the responsible sibling for a long time. I watched them for a moment, then I went back inside. Who wants to help me figure out what's for dinner? I said. Oliver raised both hands. That night, after all 3 of them were in bed, I opened Beverly's email. 6 pages of county records, transaction histories, LLC registrations. I read every line. By the time I got to the last page, I knew one thing for certain. This was no longer just about 2 weeks of babysitting. This was about my son's life and what had been quietly taken from it while he was too tired and too trusting to notice. I closed the laptop. I made chamomile tea. I sat at the kitchen table where my grandchildren had eaten dinner a few hours before, and I thought about what I was going to do. I picked up my phone and looked up the name my colleague Patty had mentioned 6 months ago, the one she said was the best divorce attorney she'd ever seen in a Chicago courtroom, Warren Gibbs. I wrote the number down on the notepad by the sink. First thing in the morning, I would call him. For tonight, I let the house be quiet. I listened to it, the particular silence of a house with sleeping children in it, which is different from any other kind of silence. Fuller, somehow, more alive. I had not heard that sound in a very long time. Day 6 started earlier than usual. I had slept maybe 4 hours, which for a former night shift nurse is enough to function on, if not enough to feel entirely human. I was up at 5:30, made coffee, and sat at the kitchen table with Beverly's documents spread out in front of me and Warren Gibbs's number on the notepad beside my cup. I called him at 8 when his office opened. His assistant put me through after I said it was regarding a potential fraud case. Warren Gibbs had a voice that was calm and unhurried, the kind of voice that costs $400 an hour and is worth every cent of it. I told him what Beverly had found. I read him the numbers. I told him about the LLC, about S. Pruitt, about Garrett Wills. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. Mrs. Hargrove, he said, your daughter-in-law didn't just use your son's name to borrow money. What you're describing with the Wicker Park condo, the purchase under his name, the quick sale, the profit routed to a private LLC, that's not a marital dispute. That's financial fraud. If there are additional victims beyond your son, meaning other people whose names were used without their knowledge, we could be looking at federal jurisdiction. I kept my voice steady. Is there a way to protect my son without making everything blow up immediately? There's a careful way to do this, he said, but I need to speak with Daniel directly. And I'd strongly suggest you find out whether there are more transactions we don't know about yet. I thanked him, made an appointment for the following week, and hung up. Then I stood at the kitchen window and watched the backyard for a moment. The garden was doing well this year. The tomatoes were coming in. The rose of Sharon along the back fence was blooming, everything green and ordinary and exactly where I'd left it. The world outside looked completely unchanged from yesterday. Funny how that works. Funny how everything can be different inside a piece of paper, while outside the window the tomatoes just keep growing. I heard feet on the stairs and turned around. Liam came into the kitchen, with his hair still flat on one side from sleeping and his phone already in his hand. He stopped when he saw the documents on the table. I stacked them face down before he could read anything. Morning, I said. Eggs or pancakes? He looked at the stack of papers, then at me. What's that stuff? Old paperwork, I said. Sit down, I'll make eggs. He sat. He didn't push it. But I noticed him glance at the stack one more time before looking away. Whatever Liam knew, and I was beginning to understand he knew more than he should, he had learned a long time ago not to ask questions that might get him answers he couldn't unknow. That was a heavy thing for a 13-year-old to be carrying around. By mid-morning, all three of them were up, and the day was doing what days do when you have children in the house, which is move faster than you expect and leave more mess than seems physically possible. Oliver had decided to build something in the living room, using couch cushions and every throw blanket I owned. Nora was reading at the kitchen table, a book she'd found on my shelf about women in medicine that she hadn't asked permission to take and that I wasn't going to ask her to put back. Liam was in his room, door half open, which I had learned to read as his version of being available. I let the morning breathe. This was something I had learned in the ICU. Not every moment needed to be managed. Sometimes the most effective thing you could do was step back and let people find their own level. Push too hard and they close off. Leave space and sometimes they surprise you. That afternoon, I took them to the park 3 blocks from the house. It was warm for September, the kind of afternoon that feels like summer making one last argument for itself before giving up. Oliver went immediately for the tallest piece of equipment and started climbing with no fear whatsoever, calling down to us every 30 seconds to make sure we were watching. I was watching. I told him so every time he asked. Nora sat next to me on the bench. She brought her book but didn't open it. We sat there for a while without talking, which was fine. Not all silences are uncomfortable. After about 15 minutes, she said, without looking up from the closed book in her lap, "I like it here." "Yeah," I said. "It's quiet," she said. "Our neighborhood is loud. There's always something." I didn't ask her to say more. I just nodded, and we sat there while Oliver narrated his own climbing adventure to anyone who would listen, and Liam drifted gradually from the far side of the park toward where we were sitting, pretending he was just walking in that direction by coincidence. He ended up about 6 feet from our bench, kicking at the wood chips. That was as close as he could get for now. That was close enough. On the way home, Oliver reached up without any preamble and took my hand. He didn't say anything about it. He just held on, swinging our arms a little, chattering about something at school. And I looked straight ahead and kept walking so I wouldn't make a thing out of it and scare him off. It was the best part of my day. That was day 7. No drama, no revelations, nothing to report. Just a Tuesday afternoon at the park. But I want you to understand something about that day because I think it matters. In 32 years of nursing, I watched a lot of people make the mistake of thinking that the big moments are the ones that count. The diagnosis, the surgery, the conversation where we finally say the hard thing. But most healing doesn't happen in those moments. It happens in the in-between. It happens in the Tuesday afternoons when nothing in particular occurs, but something essential shifts, just slightly, quietly, in a direction you couldn't have forced even if you'd tried. Those kids didn't need me to fix them. They just needed me to keep showing up. That night was different. I was at the kitchen table around 10 when I heard a knock at my bedroom door, soft, uncertain. I set down the notepad I'd been writing on and said, "Come in." Liam stood in the doorway in his socks and an old sweatshirt, hair a mess, looking younger than 13 and older than 13 at the same time, the way kids do when something is weighing on them. He looked at the floor for a moment. "Grandma Dot," he said. It was the first time any of them had called me that without being prompted. "Does Dad know about Uncle Garrett?" I didn't answer right away. I pulled out the chair across from mine and said, "Come sit down." He came and sat. He kept his eyes on the table. I said, "Tell me what you know, Liam. I'm not going to use it against your mom. I just need to understand what's been going on." He picked at a thread on his sweatshirt cuff. "Uncle Garrett comes over when Dad's on a job site. Not all the time, but enough times that we know his car. Olive-colored Jeep. Nora named it the swamp car. He almost smiled at that. Almost. Mom told us he was helping her with work stuff. She said if Dad asked, we should say no one came over. She said Dad worries too much and it would just stress him out for no reason." He stopped. "She said if we told Dad, it would make him really sad," he continued, quieter now. "Like really sad. She made it sound like he might not be able to handle it." I thought about Daniel, about how hard he works, how much he gives, how he has never once in his life been anything other than steady and decent and trying his best. My son who learned to make his own breakfast at 10 so his mother could sleep. My son who called me every Sunday without fail, even when Sarah clearly didn't want him to. My son who his own wife had convinced his children was too fragile to know the truth about his own life. "Liam," I said carefully, "your dad is not as fragile as your mom made it sound. He's a strong person. But that's not what matters right now." I looked at him until he looked at me. "What matters is that you have been carrying this secret for a long time, and that is not a weight that belongs on you. You are 13 years old. That is not your job." Something moved across his face then, something that had been wound very tight for a long time. "I didn't know what to do," he said. His voice cracked on the last word, just barely. "I didn't want everything to fall apart." "I know, I said. "But Liam, things were already broken. You didn't cause that. And you can't hold it together just by staying quiet." He nodded. He didn't cry. He wasn't quite ready for that yet. But he stayed at the table for another 20 minutes, and we talked about other things. His school, a history project he was working on, a kid in his class who was driving everyone nuts. and I let that be enough for one night. After he went to bed, I sat there for a while in the quiet. It was worse than I'd thought. Not because of Garrett, not yet, but because of what Liam had described, the way Sarah had positioned it, the way she had loaded this secret onto her oldest child and then reinforced it with the threat of his father's fragility, of the whole family coming apart if the wrong word got out. That was not a woman trying to protect her marriage. That was a woman managing her children the way you manage assets, keeping them in line, keeping them useful, keeping them quiet. I went to bed at midnight and lay there a long time before I slept. Day 8, breakfast. Oliver at the table with a blank piece of paper and a fistful of markers, which was his version of morning television. He drew constantly, always had, big colorful scenes that spilled off the edges of the page. I made oatmeal and set his bowl beside him without disturbing whatever he was working on. After a while, he pushed the paper toward me. "That's our family," he said. I looked at it. Oliver had drawn 5 figures in a row: tall, medium, medium, small, smaller. Underneath each one, he had written, in his careful 7-year-old handwriting, Dad, Liam, Nora, me, Grandma Dot. He had drawn Grandma Dot's figure with what appeared to be a stethoscope around her neck, which was the most accurate thing anyone had ever included in a piece of art about me. I looked at the drawing for a moment. 5 figures. I counted them again. "This is beautiful," I said. "Where's your mom?" Oliver picked up a red marker. Without saying anything, he drew a 6th figure in the far corner of the paper, set apart from the group by a wide stretch of blank white space. He drew a small rectangle next to it that I understood after a second was meant to be a suitcase. He put the cap back on the marker. "Mom goes on trips a lot," he said. He wasn't sad when he said it. He wasn't angry. He said it the way kids say things they've made peace with because no one ever gave them the option of feeling otherwise. "She says she's working, getting us a new house." "A new house?" I said, keeping my voice easy. "Yeah." He stirred his oatmeal. "She talks about it on the phone sometimes." I heard her say that when they have the new house, they'll finally be free. He looked up at me. "What does that mean?" "Free from what?" I looked at this 7-year-old sitting across from me with oatmeal going cold in his bowl and a drawing of his family on the table between us, his mother set apart in the far corner with a suitcase. And I understood in that moment, with complete and terrible clarity, exactly what Sarah was planning. She wasn't going on business trips. She wasn't building a future for her family. She was building an exit. And she had been for a long time. The new house wasn't for Daniel and the kids. The new house was for Sarah and Garrett. Free didn't mean her family finally getting ahead. Free meant free of them. I kept my face completely still. I am very good at keeping my face still. 32 years of delivering news in hospital hallways will do that for you. It means doing what you love, I told Oliver. That's what free means. He accepted this and went back to his oatmeal. I looked at his drawing one more time. Grandma Dot with the stethoscope, standing right in the middle of the family. That afternoon, I called Warren Gibbs and told him what Oliver had said. Warren was quiet for a long moment. The language about being free, combined with the financial activity we've already identified, Mrs. Hargrove, we need to consider the possibility that your daughter-in-law is planning to relocate, potentially with the children. If she crosses state lines with minors without the other parent's consent, that becomes a very serious legal matter. "How do I protect Daniel before she gets back?" I asked. "You need to get him here," Warren said. "He needs to hear this from you and see the documentation himself. I can file for emergency protective orders once I've spoken with him directly, but I can't do anything meaningful without him in the room." I thanked him and hung up. Then I called my son. The phone rang 6 times. Construction sites are loud, especially in the afternoon. He picked up on the 7th ring, slightly breathless, his voice carrying the particular tiredness of a man who has been working in the sun for 8 hours and still has 2 more to go. "Mom, everything okay with the kids?" "The kids are fine," I said. "Daniel, I need you to come home to Oak Park." A pause. "What happened?" "Did something." "Nothing happened," I said. "The kids are okay. But there are things you need to know before Sarah gets back, and you need to hear them from me in person." I heard him exhale. When he spoke again, his voice had that careful quality it gets when he's trying to manage two things at once, trying to be a good son and a tired man simultaneously. Mom, you and Sarah have never really gotten along, and I'm not trying to get pulled into the middle of something. I'm really tired. I don't have the bandwidth for Daniel. I stopped him, not harshly, just firmly. In 32 years of nursing, I never once called a code that wasn't real. Not once, you know that. Silence. Then, how soon do you need me there? Friday, I said. Come Friday. Another pause. Longer this time. All right, Mom, he said quietly. I'll be there Friday. I hung up and stood in the kitchen for a moment. Through the back window, I could see Oliver in the yard, running in some kind of elaborate pattern that had logic only to him, arms out like airplane wings. Nora was on the back steps watching him with the fond exasperation of a sister who would deny under any circumstances that she found her little brother charming. Liam appeared in the kitchen doorway. Who were you talking to? Your dad, I said. Something shifted in his face, fear and relief at the same time, which is one of the more complicated expressions a human face can make. And kids make it better than adults because they haven't learned yet to hide one half of it. Is he coming here? Friday, I said. Liam nodded once. Then he went out to the backyard and sat on the steps next to Nora, and after a minute he said something to her that made her uncross her arms just slightly. I didn't hear what it was. Some things between siblings aren't meant for anyone else. I turned back to the kitchen counter and started thinking about what I was going to make for dinner. Something that took a while, something worth the time. Daniel said he'd be here Friday, and I had learned a long time ago that 2 days can hold a great deal, more than you expect, more than you plan for. I just knew the clock was running, and that somewhere in Tampa, Sarah was smiling at a phone that hadn't rung in 2 days, with absolutely no idea what was waiting for her when she came home. Friday arrived quietly. No fanfare, no sign that this particular morning was different from any other. But I knew, and Daniel knew. And I think even the kids felt something in the air when they came downstairs, a held breath quality to the house that none of us named out loud. I made pot roast in the slow cooker before the kids were up. Not because I needed to cook, but because I needed to do something with my hands while I waited. And pot roast takes all day, which meant I would have something to do with my hands for most of it. James used to say that the way I cook when I'm anxious, I could feed a small country during a crisis. He wasn't wrong about that. The kids came downstairs one by one the way they always did. Oliver first, still half asleep, climbing onto his kitchen chair and resting his chin on the table like a very small, very tired gargoyle. Then Nora, dressed already, hair done, with that particular care that 10-year-old girls sometimes have, that breaks your heart a little, because you can see them practicing it being put together before the world has had a chance to shake them out of it. Then Liam, last quiet, and I noticed he kept glancing at the front door. He knew today was the day. We got through breakfast. Oliver announced that the pot roast smelled like Thanksgiving, and could we please have it for breakfast instead? Nora told him that was disgusting. He told her she was disgusting. I gave them both more orange juice and suggested they table this debate for another time. By noon, I had called Beverly to check in. She had been doing more digging since our last conversation, just as I had asked, pulling everything she could find through public channels. What she found in those additional days made the original picture look almost modest. The Wicker Park condo wasn't a one-off. There was a townhouse in Pilsen and a commercial property in Bridgeport, both of them with Daniel's name appearing as co-borrower on the original loan documents. Neither of them at addresses Daniel had any reason to know about. Beverly had cross-referenced the transaction dates with Daniel's work schedule. She read them to me one by one: Kansas City, Milwaukee, Indianapolis. Every single signing had happened while he was away. She had been doing this for at least 2 years, possibly longer. I sat with that for a while after Beverly hung up. Not the anger of it, not yet. Just the sheer scale of it, the planning it required, the patience, the sustained, deliberate deception. This wasn't a moment of weakness or a decision made under pressure. This was a system. This was architecture. I thought about Sarah at our kitchen table years ago, holding Daniel's hand, laughing at something he said, calling me a role model. I thought about how much I had wanted to believe her. At 5:30, I heard a car in the driveway. Oliver heard it too, before I did, because children have some kind of frequency adults lose track of. He bolted from the living room and had the front door open before I was out of the kitchen. Daniel came up the porch steps in his work clothes, a little sunburned across the forehead, with that particular lean quality he gets at the end of long stretches away, like the job site has been slowly returning him to something more essential. He saw Oliver hurtling toward him and caught him without breaking stride, hauling the boy up against his chest, while Oliver wrapped his legs around him like a barnacle. Nora came out of the living room and stopped at the edge of the hallway. She crossed her arms, uncrossed them, crossed them again. Then she walked forward and put her arms around her dad from the side, face turned away so no one could see whatever was happening with her expression. Liam stood at the top of the stairs. He looked at his father for a long moment. Then he came down slowly and shook Daniel's hand the way he'd been doing for about a year now, that particular teenage formality that is its own kind of tenderness. Daniel looked at me over the top of Oliver's head. I nodded toward the kitchen. He put Oliver down, told the kids he'd be right back, and followed me. I had the folder on the table, just the folder, nothing else. No speech prepared. No version of this I had rehearsed, because I've learned over the years that you can't rehearse the hard conversations. You can only decide what's in them and then find your way through. I sat across from him. I put the folder in front of him and I said, "Read this before you say anything." He looked at me for a moment. Then he opened it. I watched his face while he read. This is something nurses get good at, watching faces during hard information. Not intrusively, not hunting for a reaction, just staying present while someone processes something that is reorganizing their understanding of their own life. It looks different for everyone. Some people go very still. Some people's breathing changes. Some people get a kind of blank quality, like the face is waiting for the rest of the system to catch up. Daniel went still. He read every page. He didn't ask questions. He didn't say anything. When he got to the last page, he went back to the first one and read it again, more slowly, and I let him do that. After a while, he put the pages down. "The Wicker Park condo," he said. His voice was very flat and very quiet. "I signed those papers 2 years ago. Sarah said it was refinancing on our house. She said the bank needed both our signatures for some updated documentation." He stopped. I didn't read it carefully. I trusted her. "I know," I said, "the Pilsen place." He turned over one of the pages. "I was in Milwaukee when this was signed. She sent me the documents digitally. She said it was something for my work benefits. I signed on my phone." He set the page down. "I signed on my phone, Mom." He stood up and walked to the back window. He stood there looking out at the yard, at the slow cooker smell filling the house, at whatever he was seeing in his own head that I couldn't see. I let him stand. This is the part where people in movies say the wrong thing. They rush in with comfort too soon, or they explain too much, or they make it about themselves. I have sat beside enough people in enough hard moments to know that the most useful thing you can do in the first few minutes is nothing. You just stay in the room. That's enough. That's actually a lot. After about 10 minutes, he came back to the table and sat down. "Garrett Wills," he said. "How long?" It wasn't really a question, but I answered it anyway. "Liam says long enough that the kids know his car." Daniel closed his eyes. Then he opened them and looked at me with an expression I hadn't seen on his face since he was a boy. Since the year after James died, when he was still figuring out how to move through a world that had taken his dad out of it. Not broken. Something quieter than that. Something that understood. "I'm an idiot," he said. "No," I said. "You're a person who trusted someone he loved. Don't mix those two things up. She is responsible for what she did, not you." He let out a short, humorless laugh. "You're really not going to let me feel sorry for myself even a little?" "You can feel sorry for yourself after we handle this," I said. "Right now I need you to think clearly." He rubbed his face with both hands. "What do we do?" "Tomorrow morning you call Warren Gibbs. I already have an appointment set. I just need you on the call." I reached into my cardigan pocket and put the card on the table. "He's good. Patty Morrow recommended him. You already found a lawyer." "I found a lawyer," I confirmed. He picked up the card and looked at it. Then he shook his head slowly, something between disbelief and something else, something that might have been relief. Of course you did. That night, after dinner, after Oliver had fallen asleep on the couch watching something animated and had to be carried upstairs, after Nora had said goodnight with the particular deliberateness of a child who has been thinking about a hug all day and finally decides to go ahead and give one, after Liam had paused at the bottom of the stairs and said to Daniel very quietly, "I'm sorry, Dad. I should have told you sooner." And Daniel had said, "That was not your job, buddy. That was never your job." After all of that, Daniel and I sat at the kitchen table with decaf coffee and the remains of the pot roast, and we talked. He told me things he had been swallowing for years. The way he'd felt something was off for a long time, but couldn't name it, couldn't locate it, kept turning it over, looking for the angle he was missing. The way Sarah had had a talent for making him doubt himself. Like his discomfort was a failure of imagination, not a warning sign. The way he'd stopped talking to me about it because every time he did, she'd turn it into evidence of something wrong with our relationship, his and mine, like the problem was that he still needed his mom at 38 instead of the problem being that she'd isolated him from someone who loved him. I told him I should have said something sooner. He told me I couldn't have said anything he would have heard. We sat with both of those things being true at the same time, which is how it usually is with the hard stuff. Saturday morning, he called Warren Gibbs and they talked for 40 minutes. I stayed in the kitchen and listened from a distance, not to the words, but to the quality of Daniel's voice, the way it went from tight and careful at the start to something more settled by the end. After he hung up, he sat at the table with his phone in his hand. "Warren thinks there may be other victims," he said, "other people whose names she used. He says if that's the case, this goes beyond a civil matter." "I know," I said. "Beverly found references to at least 2 other names in the LLC documents. People who might not know yet." Daniel was quiet for a moment. "Then I can't just let this be a private thing, even if I wanted to." "No," I said. "You can't." He nodded once, the way he used to nod when he was a kid, and he'd made a decision he knew was hard but right. It was the same nod he'd been making since he was 9 years old. 29 years and it hadn't changed. "What about Sarah?" he asked. "When she finds out, we know." "She finds out when she gets back," I said, "not before. We don't tip anything until Warren tells us the timing is right." He looked at me across the table. "You've been planning this since day one, haven't you?" "I've been paying attention since day one," I said. "That's what I do." Sunday passed quietly. Monday, too. The kids and Daniel fell into a rhythm I hadn't expected, but probably should have. He took Oliver to the hardware store and let him pick out a small project kit, the kind with balsa wood and pre-cut pieces, and they spent most of Monday afternoon at the kitchen table building what was supposed to be a birdhouse, but gradually evolved into something more abstract. Nora read her way through 2 more books from my shelf. Liam and Daniel watched a game together on the couch Tuesday night, not talking much, just in the same space, which seemed to be exactly what both of them needed. I watched all of this from the edges and thought about the word family, not the version of it that gets put on decorative signs in kitchen stores. The actual thing, the way it functions or the way it's supposed to, which is that you show up consistently and you stay and you do not make your presence contingent on conditions. That's it. That is the whole formula. And it is not complicated, and somehow it is still very hard for some people. On Wednesday morning, Rhonda Pierce arrived. She was from the Department of Children and Family Services, a calm woman in her early 40s with sensible shoes and a way of moving through a space that made it immediately clear she had seen a lot and was not easily startled. She hadn't come because I'd called her. She had come because Liam's school counselor had filed a report 6 weeks earlier after noticing changes in his demeanor, a withdrawal, a heaviness that hadn't been there the year before. The report had worked its way through the system, and this was the follow-up visit. I showed her in. She introduced herself to the kids individually, spent time with each of them privately in the back bedroom, while Daniel and I waited in the kitchen. Oliver came out after his interview and immediately asked if she wanted to see his birdhouse. She said she would love to. She looked at it with complete seriousness. and told him it was excellent engineering, which was the right thing to say. Before she left, she stood in the kitchen doorway and told us she was going to recommend a specialist for the kids. A child psychologist named Dr. Anita Solberg, who worked specifically with family trauma cases. Not because the children were in danger here, she said, looking around the kitchen, at the pot on the stove and the drawings on the refrigerator that Oliver had insisted on hanging up, at the general evidence of a household that was currently functioning, but because they had been carrying some things that children shouldn't carry, and they deserved support working through those things. Daniel said yes, immediately. After Rhonda left, I called Dr. Solberg's office and made 3 appointments, one for each child, starting the following week. Dr. Anita came to the house Thursday afternoon. She was younger than I expected, maybe mid-30s, with a directness I appreciated and a way of listening that reminded me of the best attending physicians I'd worked with, the ones who heard the whole sentence before they started formulating a response. After she'd met with all 3 kids separately, she sat with Daniel and me at the kitchen table. Liam has been carrying a significant emotional burden, she said. He's taken on a protective role in relation to his siblings that's well beyond what's appropriate for his age. He's been managing information, managing emotions, managing the family dynamics as he understands them, and he's been doing it alone. That's exhausting, and it's not his job. She looked at Daniel. The good news is he's perceptive and he's resilient, and those are real assets. But he needs to be able to put this weight down. What about Nora? Daniel asked. Nora is anxious, has been for a while, I'd guess. She manages it very well on the surface, which means it often goes unnoticed, but it's there. She needs to learn that it's safe to be imperfect in front of people who love her, that she doesn't have to hold herself together all the time. And Oliver? Dr. Anita's expression shifted slightly, just enough to tell me the next part was going to be harder. Oliver is doing better than the other 2 in some ways, partly because he's young enough that certain things haven't fully registered yet. But he's always looking for reassurance, always checking whether he's still welcome. That kind of thing develops in kids who haven't received consistent, steady attention over time. The table was quiet for a moment. Can they work through this? I asked. Yes, she said without hesitating. They already are, actually. I can see it in how they talk about the last week and a half. They know something has shifted. They feel safer than they did. She looked at me. Whatever you've been doing, keep doing it. After she left, Daniel sat at the table for a long time. I refilled his coffee without asking. He stared at it. I didn't know it was this bad, he said. You were working, I said, 60, 70 hours a week. You can't see everything when you're that tired. That's not an excuse. No, I said, it's a reason. Those aren't the same thing. You didn't do this to them, Daniel. But you're here now, and that matters. He nodded. He looked at his coffee. Then he said, very quietly, when did you get so wise, Mom? I've always been this wise, I said. You just didn't need it until now. He laughed. A real one this time. It had been a while since I'd heard that. Thursday evening, I made pot roast again, because the first one had gone over well, and because I believe in things that work. All 5 of us sat at the table together, and Liam actually started a conversation without being prompted. Something about a podcast he'd been listening to. And Daniel asked questions, and Oliver interrupted 12 times with largely unrelated observations. And Nora corrected Oliver's grammar twice, and the whole thing was so completely ordinary that I had to look down at my plate for a moment. After dinner, Liam stayed to help with the dishes. He washed, I dried. We worked our way through the stack without talking much. Then he said, not looking up from the soapy water, do you think Mom has changed? I dried a plate, set it in the cabinet. I don't know, I said. That's honest. Do you think she'll try to fight when she comes back and finds out? She'll try, I said, but we'll be ready. He nodded. He handed me another plate. Grandma Dot, I'm glad you made us come here. I didn't make you, I said. Your mother brought you here. I just didn't waste the time. He considered that. That's a Grandma Dot answer, he said. It's the only kind I know how to give, I said. We finished the dishes. I turned the lights off in the kitchen. Through the back window, the garden was dark, and still the tomatoes invisible in the shadows, the rose of Sharon just a shape against the fence. Sarah was coming home tomorrow. Noon, she had texted Daniel, as if she were just coming home from any trip, as if nothing in this house had changed. I went to bed at 10. I lay there for a while, not anxious exactly, just alert. The way I used to feel on the night shift before a hard case, when you knew something significant was coming and your body was already arranging itself to meet it. Ready is mostly a decision, not a feeling, so I decided, and then I slept. Saturday morning arrived gray and cool, the kind of September day that can't quite decide if it's still summer or already fall. I was up at 5:30 as always. I made coffee and stood at the kitchen window for a while watching the garden in the early light. The tomatoes dark red now and needing to be picked, the rose of Sharon going quiet for the season. I thought about James. I do that sometimes in the early mornings when the house is still and there's no one needing anything from me yet. I thought about what he would have made of all this whole complicated mess that had grown up in the years since he left. He was a practical man, James. Not cold, not unfeeling, but practical in the way that people who work with their hands tend to be, with a preference for problems that could be identified and fixed and finished. I think he would have seen through Sarah faster than I did. He was always better than me at reading people who wanted something. By 7, the kids were up. I made scrambled eggs and toast, and we all ate together, the 4 of us, Daniel included. And I watched my son watch his children eat breakfast, and I could see him trying to memorize it the way he does when something matters to him and he knows it's about to change. After breakfast, I took the kids aside individually, not to prepare them or coach them or say anything complicated, just a few minutes each. With Oliver, I sat on the back steps while he threw a tennis ball against the fence. I told him that today might feel a little strange, and that was okay, and that no matter what happened, he was safe and he was loved, and those 2 things were not going to change. He caught the ball and looked at me very seriously and said, "Is Mom coming home today?" I said, "Yes." He nodded and threw the ball again. "Okay," he said. "Just okay." 7 years old and steadier than most adults I know. With Nora, I found her in the bedroom packing her book into her overnight bag for Beverly's. She already knew the plan, and she hadn't argued about it the way I'd half expected. I sat on the edge of the bed and told her she didn't have to feel any particular way about today, that whatever she felt was fine. She kept packing for a moment, and then she sat down next to me and said, "I'm not sad." A pause. "I don't think I'm sad. I don't know what I am." I told her that not knowing was also fine, that feelings didn't always come with labels, and you didn't have to force them into ones that didn't fit. She leaned against my shoulder for about 10 seconds, very briefly, the way cats do when they want contact, but also want it to be on their terms. Then she stood up and finished packing. With Liam, I didn't say much at all. He was in the kitchen doorway watching Daniel check his phone, and I came and stood next to him, and we looked at the same thing for a moment. Then I said, "You did a brave thing, telling me what you told me. Don't forget that." He looked at the floor, then he looked up. "Is it going to be okay?" I thought about that. I didn't give him the easy answer because he was 13 and he deserved better than the easy answer. "It's going to be real," I said. "And real is better than okay, even when it's harder." He thought about that for a second. Then he nodded once, the same nod his father has, and I understood for the first time how deeply alike they are underneath everything that's been layered on top. Beverly came at 10. She pulled up in her old Volvo and came to the door and hugged all 3 kids in turn, which they allowed with varying degrees of enthusiasm. Oliver fully, Nora sideways Liam, with the awkward tolerance of a teenager who still wants the hug but will not admit it. She gave me a look over Liam's shoulder that said everything without saying anything, and I said everything back with my eyes. They loaded into the Volvo. Oliver waved from the back window as they pulled away, his whole arm going the way he waves at everything. I watched until the car turned the corner. Then I went inside and made more coffee, and Warren Gibbs arrived at 11, and we sat at the kitchen table, the 3 of us, Daniel and Warren and me, and we waited. Warren had aged well, the kind of man who looks more like himself the older he gets. He had the folder open in front of him and a yellow legal pad and a pen he kept clicking once, a small habit he probably didn't know he had. He went over the plan one more time with Daniel in a low, unhurried voice, and Daniel listened and nodded and asked two precise questions, the questions of an engineer, focused on sequence and structure. What happens first? What happens if that doesn't work? What's the contingency? Warren answered both. Then they sat quietly and drank their coffee. At 11:47, we heard the car. I know the sound of Sarah's SUV. I had heard it pull away from this curb 14 days ago, and the sound of it coming back settled something in my chest in a way I didn't expect, not quite dread and not quite readiness, but somewhere in between. The feeling of standing outside a trauma bay before the ambulance arrives, knowing what's coming and having done everything you can do to prepare, and understanding that preparation only takes you so far. The front door opened. She didn't knock. She never knocked. This was not her house, but she had never treated it as anything other than a place she passed through on her own schedule. She was tanned, wearing a cream-colored blazer over dark jeans, and she had her sunglasses pushed up on her head like a headband, and she looked exactly like a woman returning from a successful trip, which I suppose is what she believed she was. She looked around. She clocked Daniel first, then Warren, then me. Something passed through her eyes very quickly, there and gone, recalibrated in less than a second. Well, she said, and her voice was light, almost amused. Family meeting? She set her bag down and looked past us toward the hallway. Where are the kids? Sit down, Sarah, Daniel said. His voice was different. That was the first thing she noticed. I watched her notice it, watched a small adjustment happen behind her eyes. I just got home, she said, still light. Can I at least get some water before? Sit down, Daniel said again, same tone, same volume. Not louder, not harder. Just the same, immovable. She sat. Daniel put the folder on the table and opened it. He didn't make a production of it. He just opened it and put his finger on the first page. The Wicker Park condo, he said. Tell me about it. She looked at the page. I watched her read her own name, S. Pruitt, on a document that was supposed to have nothing to do with her maiden name, because she had been Sarah Hargrove for 9 years. Where did you get this? She asked. It's a public record, I said. Anyone can pull it. She looked at me. Something shifted in her face, the lightness dropping away, and what was underneath was not fear, not yet. It was anger. The particular kind of anger that people feel when they've been caught not by someone clever, but by someone they had dismissed. You did this, she said. Of course you did this. You have been trying to undermine my marriage since day one dot, and I am not going to sit here and let you, Sarah. Daniel said her name quietly, and she stopped. Look at me. She looked at him. The Pilsen property, he said. The Bridgeport commercial space. 3 loans with my name on them that I never knew existed. $47,000 that passed through an LLC with your maiden name on it. He paused. I'm not asking if this happened. I'm looking at the proof that it happened. What I'm asking is why. The room was very quiet. Sarah sat with her hands flat on the table, and I watched the calculations happening behind her face, the rapid assessment of what was known, what was provable, what could still be managed. She was very good at managing things. But there is a particular quality to the moment when someone realizes that what they are trying to manage has grown larger than their ability to manage it. And I saw that quality arrive in her expression now, slowly like weather moving in. Garrett and I were trying to build something, she said finally. Her voice was flat and careful now, the lightness gone completely. The market was moving. There was an opportunity, and we had to move fast. And I knew you would never go for it, Daniel. You never go for anything that isn't completely certain and completely mapped out. And I couldn't wait for you to talk yourself into it. So you signed my name, Daniel said. I used your credit profile, she said. That's different. It's not different, Warren said quietly. It was the first time he'd spoken, and she turned to look at him like she'd momentarily forgotten he was there. Mrs. Hargrove, my name is Warren. I represent your husband. What you're describing is the unauthorized use of another person's credit and identity to obtain financing. That's fraud. If there are additional victims beyond Daniel, which we have reason to believe there are, this becomes a federal matter. She stared at him. Federal. We've already been in contact with Daniel's bank, Warren continued in the same even tone. and we're in the process of filing for emergency protective orders regarding the children and the marital assets. You can't. She stopped, started again. I'm their mother. You can't take my kids. No one is taking your children, Warren said. But given the financial circumstances and the evidence of a planned relocation that Daniel was not informed of, the court will need to make arrangements that protect everyone involved, including the children. She was quiet. I watched her process this. She sat very still, which was unusual for Sarah, who is almost always moving, adjusting, repositioning. The stillness told me the calculation was taking longer than usual. Then she picked up her phone. She called Garrett. It rang and went to voicemail. She called again, voicemail. A third time, and she set the phone down and picked it up and called one more time. And this time someone answered. The voice on the other end was not Garrett. I could hear it from where I was sitting, not the words but the register, professional and careful. A man who had been briefed on exactly what to say and was saying it. Sarah's face went very still. She lowered the phone. She set it on the table. She looked at it for a moment like it was something she didn't recognize. He hired a lawyer, she said, not to any of us in particular, to herself. He retained his own counsel 3 days ago, Warren said. He's cooperating with the investigation. The word cooperating landed in the room and stayed there. I want to tell you that I felt something satisfying in that moment. I want to tell you that watching Sarah understand what had happened felt like justice, clean and clear. But that is not what I felt. What I felt was something quieter and sadder than that. I looked at this woman who had spent years building an elaborate structure of deception, who had used her own children as buffers and her own husband as a financial instrument, who had planned a future that required erasing the people who loved her most. And I saw someone who had run a very long way from something and had finally, inevitably, run out of road. I did not feel triumphant. What I felt was tired and relieved and ready to be done. She signed the papers. Not immediately, not without a long silence that stretched past comfortable, not without one more attempt to re-Fred happens as something other than what it was. But eventually, with Warren going through each page in his steady, unhurried voice, explaining what she was agreeing to and what the alternative looked like, she picked up the pen. Warren explained the terms regarding the children clearly and without editorializing. Daniel would have primary custody. Sarah would have supervised visitation on a schedule to be confirmed by the court. This was not necessarily permanent, but it was what the situation required while the financial investigation was ongoing and while the children's needs were being assessed by Dr. Solberg. Sarah could contest it. She had every legal right to contest it. But Warren laid out what contesting it would look like given the evidence currently in existence. And after a moment, she did not contest it. When it was done, she sat back from the table and looked at me. You're satisfied now, she said. It was not quite a question. I'm not satisfied, I said. I'm not happy about any of this. None of this is what I wanted. You wanted me gone, she said. Admit it. I wanted my grandchildren to be safe, I said. I wanted my son to know what was happening in his own life. That's all I ever wanted. Whether you were in the picture or not was never the point, Sarah. She looked at me for a long moment. I looked back. Then she said, quieter, the armor almost entirely gone. Just a person sitting at a table. I didn't think it would go this far. I know, I said. I thought I was building something better, she said. I know, I said again. But you were building it on top of people. She didn't answer that. She stood up. She picked up her bag. She looked around the kitchen one more time, at the slow cooker on the counter, and the drawings on the refrigerator and my kitchen table that had been in this house for 30 years. She walked to the door. I called her name, just her name, nothing else. She stopped, her hand on the door frame, not quite looking back. If you ever want to be a real presence in these kids' lives, I said, the way is not through lawyers or courts or strategy. The way is just to show up, consistently, without conditions. I paused. The door here is not locked. She didn't respond. She walked out. The door closed behind her without a slam, just the quiet click of a latch, and then the sound of the car starting and pulling away, and then nothing. Daniel sat at the table with his hands flat in front of him. Warren was making notes on his legal pad. The slow cooker hummed on the counter. I called Beverly. She picked up on the second ring. I said, "You can bring them home." 35 minutes later, the Volvo came back. Oliver came through the door first, as always, at velocity. He stopped when he saw Daniel sitting at the table and launched himself across the kitchen and into his father's arms, and Daniel held him with the completeness of someone who has just been reminded exactly what they're holding on to. Nora came in behind him. She stood at the edge of the kitchen looking at her father and her brother, and then she walked over, deliberate, and put her arms around both of them. From the side, her face pressed into Daniel's shoulder. Liam came last. He stood in the doorway for a moment, taking the room in. He looked at me. I gave him a small nod. Then he crossed the kitchen and sat down next to his dad and his brother and his sister, and he didn't say anything at all, just put his hand on Daniel's back, and that was enough. Oliver lifted his head from Daniel's shoulder and looked around, and that was when he saw Sarah was not in the room. He looked at the empty doorway, then at his dad, then at me. I held very still, waiting to see what he would do with it. He looked at the doorway one more time. Then he looked back at Daniel and said, "Dad, Grandma Dot taught me how to make scrambled eggs. Can I make some for everyone?" Daniel's face did something I don't have words for. "Yeah, buddy," he said. "Yeah, that sounds great." Oliver climbed down from his father's lap and went to get the eggs from the refrigerator, narrating his process to no one in particular, and Nora peeled herself away from Daniel and went to supervise because someone had to, and Liam leaned back in his chair and looked at the ceiling for a moment with the expression of someone who has just put down something very heavy. I stood at the edge of the kitchen and watched my family make scrambled eggs at 4 in the afternoon on a Saturday in September, and I did not try to make it mean anything more than what it was. It was enough. It was more than enough. That was 6 months ago now. The scrambled eggs were not very good, if I'm being honest. Oliver put in too much butter and not enough salt and scrambled them past the point of no return. But Daniel ate every bite and said they were the best eggs he had ever had, which is the kind of thing fathers say and mean completely. Rhonda Pierce closed her DCFS file 8 weeks after that Saturday. She called to let me know and said something I have thought about several times since. She said that in 20 years of casework, she had learned that the difference between families that break and families that don't is rarely about the size of the problem. It's about whether there's someone in the family willing to stand still while everything moves around them. Someone who doesn't run. I thanked her and she said, "Don't thank me, you did the work." Daniel is still in Oak Park. He took a job with a firm closer to home, a step down in salary for now, but a step back toward his own life. And he shows up for dinner most Fridays and stays too late, and that is fine with me. That is more than fine. Liam is making bread. He started with a basic recipe he found online and has been slowly complicating it, adding steps and variables and careful assessments of what went wrong. Last week, he brought over a sourdough loaf that was genuinely very good and tried not to look proud about it and failed completely. Nora joined the volleyball team at her school in the spring. I went to her first home game and embarrassed her thoroughly by being the loudest person in the gymnasium, and she rolled her eyes at me from across the court with the particular expression of someone who is annoyed and privately pleased in equal measure. "We are going to be fine, Nora and I. We are going to be more than fine." Oliver is taking piano lessons on the old upright in my living room that has been there since Daniel was small. He is not naturally gifted, but he is stubborn about it in the best possible way, the kind of stubborn that tends to matter more than talent in the long run. Last week, he played a full song from beginning to end for the first time without stopping, and he looked up at me when it was over with his whole face open and waiting, and I clapped until my hands hurt. Sarah has supervised visits every other Saturday. The kids come home from those visits quieter than usual sometimes, and on those evenings I try to make something warm for dinner and not ask too many questions and just be a steady presence in the room. Dr. Anita says that's the right approach. She says the kids don't need to choose. They just need to know that someone is always there when they come back through the door. I am always there. The brochure for Sedona is still on the kitchen table. I look at it sometimes. I'll get there eventually. There's no rush. This past Tuesday morning, I was sitting in the backyard with my coffee, still hot, watching the garden come back from winter. The tomatoes aren't in yet, but the soil is ready and the rose of Sharon is budding. Oliver was sitting at the patio table doing homework, or something adjacent to homework, the pencil moving in a way that suggested the paper was getting more art than algebra. He looked up at one point and said, completely out of nowhere, "Grandma Dot, are you happy?" I looked at him, at this boy who 8 months ago drew his mother in the far corner of a picture of his family with a suitcase next to her, who ate bad scrambled eggs at 4 in the afternoon and called them dinner, who holds my hand when we walk somewhere and doesn't comment on it. I thought about the question seriously, the way it deserved to be thought about. "Yeah," I said, "I really am." He nodded, like this was the answer he expected, and went back to his work. I drank my coffee, and it was still hot, and the garden was waking up. And inside the house, I could hear Liam on a phone call, and Nora's music through her bedroom window, and Daniel moving around in the kitchen, doing something that involved more cabinet doors than strictly necessary. I sat there and I let it be exactly what it was, and that was everything. There is one more thing I want to say before I go. People ask me sometimes whether I feel guilty, whether I overstepped, whether it was my place. Here is what I know. I spent 32 years in rooms where people were dying, and the thing that stays with me is not the dramatic moments. It's the families who almost missed it, the people who saw something wrong and thought it wasn't their place to say so, and waited until it was too late to do anything but grieve what they could have kept. I spent a long time thinking that keeping quiet was keeping the peace. It wasn't. It was just keeping the pain somewhere no one could treat it. If you are sitting somewhere right now and something doesn't feel right, and you have been telling yourself it isn't your place, I want to say this to you directly. You are allowed to love people out loud. You are allowed to stand between something harmful and the people you love, even when it costs you something. Silence is a choice too, and silence has consequences just like everything else. I almost waited too long. I'm glad I didn't. That's all.